being capable of that, just interacting with another human and having, a real conversation. We just kept talking about her the whole way home. And it was like, I would never have accepted that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known how to accept that. And so, I mentioned love and that being such a huge part of it. And it's not just giving love, but it's receiving it as well. And being capable and knowing how to let that in and being vulnerable enough to let it in. And so it literally shifts everything. It shifts every single relationship you could ever have.
Hey, sober people and sober adjacent people. Welcome to I Have 12 Questions. I'm Amanda Patton, your host, the leading expert on nothing. However, I am in recovery and I love it so much so that I launched this podcast where we get to talk to people who are trudging the road to happy freaking destiny across all the different ways that people get there. So while this is definitely through the lens of recovery and sobriety, these stories and the themes that we'll be covering are universally human. So love, loss, grief, excitement, parenting, outside issues, purpose, God stuff, whatever. In the words of the great Ted Lasso by way of Walt Whitman, I want to be curious, not judgmental. So like I said, we'll be talking to people in recovery. We're going to be talking to experts and practitioners who help those people along their path in recovery. And we're just really excited to hear people tell their stories and to be inspired by them and to create a community of support for everybody in recovery and people who know and love people who struggle with addiction issues and whatnot. So anyways, we're so glad you're here and thanks for listening. Hey listeners, just a quick disclaimer before we get into the interview. These episodes may contain adult language and subject matter that's not appropriate for all audiences. Also, we are not doctors or psychiatrists, so what we share on these episodes is certainly not to be considered medical or psychological advice, just our own personal experiences, which we hope will be helpful to others on a similar quest. So that's it, and thanks for listening. Well, happy day, sober family and our entire listener community. Thank you so much for joining. Our guest for this episode is someone that I adore for many reasons. I met her at my local yoga studio and was immediately drawn to her. To be fair, I don't really know a lot about her outside of her being, my yoga teacher or a yoga teacher, but that's why we're here today to hear about her recovery story and to learn new things together. Her name is Alaska, and she has a lot of wisdom to share. Her episode is available wherever you get your podcasts, so Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube as well. And thanks for your support as always. And then you can get links to all of our, all the platforms where the show is available on ihave12questions.com. So hi, Alaska, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. So I remember, I think I overheard you talking to someone else, and I lived in Austin for a really long time, and now I live in Marble Falls, which is different, very different from places I've lived before.
Yeah.
I wanted to be closer to my family, and it's beautiful and peaceful out here in a lot of ways, and not so much in others. And so I remember hearing you talking. And you were talking about something to do with recovery or sobriety or something. I just kind of heard something and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Plus you just don't really look like other people out here. You've just got this very, crunchy, the type of people that I always find very interesting, and your energy is very inviting. And then the way that you teach in yoga is very kind and gentle and open. And I can just tell that you've, care about other people's experiences. And most people like that have been through stuff where maybe their experiences weren't always great. And so they're very sensitive to others. And so I remember I think I asked you after class that day, like, did I hear you say you're in recovery? And you started kind of telling me some stories. So that's really, I remember back then I was like, I would love to have you on my podcast just because I feel like you have a lot to share. And I've gotten to know you a little bit just chatting after class here and there, and stuff going on with your family. And I had stuff going on with my family. And so we've gotten to connect in that way. But beyond that, really know a whole lot about you or your journey. So let's start with an icebreaker, since we like to keep it light in the beginning. If your life had a theme song, what would it be and why?
Ooh, a theme song. Man,
I know it's hard, right?
that's a really good one. I think "Let It Be" by the Beatles would be my theme song.
Nice.
Yeah, and because I think that I don't know, I think that's a pretty good philosophy just in life in general. Like, try not to shove things where they don't fit, and go with the flow, which is probably the hippie in me, right?
I
Um,
love that.
but I don't know. I think that life's easier when you figure out where you fit instead of trying to make yourself fit in places where you don't. So
Exactly. Also, just that song in general is it's so applicable and relevant all the time. Now, probably more
yeah.
than ever, maybe even more than when, like, it's just, that's a great one. No one's ever said that one before. Of course, that's so fitting. So fitting. Um, well, when did you get clean, sober, whatever you call it? We all have different ways of describing that nowadays, I guess. And can you kind of take us back through what it was like for you when you were in active, I don't know, some people don't like all these words that we used to use, like addiction or substance use disorders or whatever, because people don't like stigma and labels. So whatever it was that you were experiencing, that wasn't making you happy, what was that like for you? What was that journey like?
so I got sober May 5th of 2018. So
Okay.
almost 7 years ago.
Nice.
Um, and honestly, my addiction was just sad, I think is the appropriate word, and I don't know that I knew that then. So I started using really young. I was 9 when I first started smoking weed, and I think that weed now is I have differing opinions on it. I think that for me, the way that I use things is not in any way medicinal, right? And so I think primarily, you mentioned stigma and labels and things like that, and I think that the number one thing for me is know thyself. Um, know how you use things and how you can cope and how you can heal. Because I didn't, and I think when I smoked weed for the first time, I again 9 years old, and I remember the feeling of wow, this is it. Like, this is what I've needed. And
Yeah.
so it never stopped. And so that kind of snowballed into what else can I add to this that helps me feel the same way that this does. And
Hmm.
it's funny because people say, "Oh, weed's a gateway drug." And a lot of people are like, "No, it's not." And really I think that at least for my generation, it really was. I think that there's a lot of different things coming out about marijuana now that, people are like, oh, it's medicinal and it has all these great qualities. And I believe that it can be, right? It's legal in a lot of places now. Um, and again, I go back to it depends on how you use it.
Mm.
But for our generation, especially, there was a lot of lying and a lot of fear that was associated with that. So, we had adults telling us that, it's bad and it's terrible and it does all these awful things. And there was like the commercials of the girl melting into the couch and like, this is you
Yeah.
on drugs kind of thing, right? And
Yeah.
and they don't have that now. But then for me, it was for my personal beliefs and understanding of it. It was like once I tried it, it was like, well, this isn't even that bad. So what else are you guys lying about? Right. So then for me, it really was a gateway because it was like, if you lied to me about this, you must be lying about Coke. You must be lying about pills. You must be lying about meth. And so
Yep.
I became willing to try all of these things because if you lied to me about that, you likely lied to me about everything else. And so it really did kind of open my brain to thinking that if this really isn't that bad, then neither is that. And so I kind of just added things to my get high arsenal.
Yeah.
Um, and there really wasn't, people say, what was your drug of choice? And it's like, what wasn't my drug of choice? If it was available, I mean, it really was. And if I
Yeah.
could change the way that I feel, and really what happened is because I started so young, um, I didn't learn that's half of my childhood. And, at the point I got sober, all of my adulthood. And so I didn't learn how to have healthy relationships. I didn't learn how to cope. I did not learn how to responsibly feel. And it really just kind of made my life a disaster. And that was all I knew. And so I didn't know that it could be different. And so what that looked like was I was in a terrible relationship. I was in my first relationship when I was 19, and we used everything. And towards the end, I think the last 3 years of our 11-year relationship, we started using meth and lost everything: our house, our pets, our cars, boats, everything I'd ever worked for. And I ended up living in this really busted, pull behind trailer that I bought for $200. A tree had fallen on the back of it, so there was no insulation in the back of it. And I moved into that in January in Alaska. It was January 27th. And my wife at the time, my ex-wife, had gone and stolen the propane that I bought to keep warm, and I didn't have any electricity.
God.
And it was 30 below zero. And so, just absolutely freezing. And that was all I had. I didn't have a car. I didn't have anything. And she and I were, at a really kind of abusive point, I think, from both respects in our relationship. And I found out from one of our mutual drug friends that she wanted to she was trying to sell my trailer that I was living in out from underneath me.
Wow.
And that was it for me. I was like, I have to go. I really wanted my relationship with her to work so bad that I was accepting really toxic behavior from her. Not that I wasn't toxic. I will take full responsibility for my part in that. But I was just really had no sense of value or self-worth, and so I was willing to go through so many things that now I'm like, ain't no way.
Yeah.
That it just really was self-destructive, and so I had this moment where I was like, okay, I have to go, and I packed up my stuff. My mom drove me like 6 hours to a town in Fairbanks, where I went and I'd met this dude a couple months earlier, and so a stranger essentially, and he was working in a little tourist town in Healy, Alaska, which is in Denali National Park, and I cold turkeyed off drugs. And beautiful, beautiful place. I literally lived under a tarp in the woods on Alaska Railroad property. It was absolutely beautiful and a horrible time. And then we ended up backpacking to Fairbanks. We stayed there for a couple weeks, bought a plane tickets to Portland, Oregon. We lived in Portland for a little while, and then backpacked to Austin. And and at that point, I didn't even have a pair of shoes. We walked in. I was in sandals, and I had a 70-pound pack, and that was everything I owned. And when we got there, he ended up hooking up with his ex-girlfriend, and so I was alone in Austin, Texas. And I had a friend that I knew lived in Texas, but I didn't know where. And I called her, and her and another friend of mine really just kind of helped me out in believing in me. And the unfortunate thing is that I changed my geographical location.
Yeah.
I didn't learn anything new. And so here I was, maybe a couple months sober. And I got right back on drugs. I had all the same behaviors, all the same traumas, all the same fears, and I didn't know how to live sober. And so I just collected all the same broken people, just in a different place, right? And I got right back on drugs, and it rapidly snowballed. I got arrested and went to jail for 110 days, and in Llano County Jail. It was absolutely terrible. I went from being in the woods all the time to being under these fluorescent lights. There was one light in there that never turned off.
Oh.
And it was this horrible experience. And when I got out, it was 110 days, right? That I was completely sober, and I got out, and I was desperate to have something different. And, the big book, right? Alcoholics Anonymous talks about not being able to imagine your life with drugs, or not being able to imagine your life without them. And it was really that point where it was like, I am desperate to do something different. I just don't know what I need to do.
Yeah.
And so it was really kind of, that was my jumping off point. I got out of jail and lived in a homeless shelter for a while. I got a job, and I just slowly started, I just did what I was told, right? I was on probation when I got out, and they said, go to meetings. And I used
Yeah.
to walk 2.5 miles to go to a meeting, and I'd go every single day, because it was like, if they have sobriety and I can just believe that they're actually sober and that they suffered just like I did, then there has to be something that I can do to get there too.
Right.
And really, so it was just a desperation, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's incredible. And everybody has different definitions of rock bottom, but I would say, jail sucks. I've been the guest of Travis County and Harris County several times,
Yes.
and really sucks pretty bad. And then also, I think, but like the thought of sleeping in a busted trailer, like in 30 below weather, while your ex is trying to like steal your stuff and sell your shelter and whatnot. And then, but I liked what you said too about taking a geographical cure, because we talk about that a lot in meetings, right? Where I'm just gonna get out of this city. I'm gonna move,
Yeah.
or I'm gonna break up with this person, or I'm gonna get a different job, or I'm gonna, there's all these things that are gonna fix us, and then wherever you go, there you are, and that those patterns keep following. And I remember I kept doing that too. I would get in a different relationship with literally the same exact guy with different skin on, right? Like just
Yeah.
over and
Yeah.
over. I'm like, why am I still attracted? It's just the same. And I finally realized, I mean, I guess some of the stuff I heard in meetings started to sink in, like the drinking and the drugs are just a symptom. Like it really isn't the problem. It has nothing to do with the
Yeah.
problem. The problem is like deep stuff that we just will not or cannot look at. And, I think a lot of people feel bad, or they would take it back, or they have all this guilt and shame about using. And I don't anymore, because that's how I survived. And for whatever reason, that's what I needed to do at the time to get through stuff. And I wasn't ready to look at some of the things I needed to look at. I just wasn't. I mean,
Yeah.
some trauma, I mean, you have to be really careful with that. You can't just dive in
Yeah.
and, you need sometimes professional help, you need support. There's also timing of when we're ready for that. And, what sucks really bad though is when you get a few months under your belt, clean and sober, and then you go back to it. And
Yeah.
that's what I kept doing. The consequences got bad. I got tired of it. I got my shit together for a little bit. And then eventually I would just drift back. And every time I thought I was fixed, I thought I was cured. I'm better now. I can control it this time. And I thought I was having fun. I didn't realize that I was medicating. Um,
Yeah.
and running and doing all that stuff. So it took me a long time to actually, for my ego to accept the fact that I was not going to be able to control this. And like what you said in the very beginning of like, you have to know yourself, your body, your
Yeah.
patterns, your physiology, your genetics. Like, I see other people smoke weed and they have absolutely no issue with it. I just know myself well enough. I don't even like weed, but if I smoked it, I
Yeah.
guarantee you I would smoke it all day, every day, because that's
Yeah.
what I do. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of, but we want to, I don't know, for me, one of the many reasons I kept relapsing is because I watched other people who I considered addicts also. I saw them do it with impunity or without consequences. And so I kept telling myself that story that I could somehow figure that out. Like I can also just do coke every once in a while, one weekend a month or something, and figure it. Because I saw other people doing it. Well, they're not me, and it took me a
Yeah.
long time to realize like I am mentally and bodily different from my fellows. Like that's actually, a true statement. So I love that. I love what you shared though, because it takes a lot of wisdom and it takes a lot of pain to get to that level of wisdom, right? Of like,
Yeah.
understanding yourself well enough. And I love that you shared all of that. And I'm sorry that you went through that, but also I guess I'm glad that your journey was that, because now it just explains a lot about why you are the way you are, like why you're
Yeah.
so wise.
Well, I appreciate that. I certainly don't feel it some days, like when I click
Yeah.
the wrong link for the podcast. but but you know, in the moment of all of those things happening, it's like you experience it and you're like, I mean, literally, I remember dropping to my knees at some point when we got evicted out of our duplex, and I was like, what the fuck do I do? And just screaming at the top of my lungs in my driveway in the middle of January. And it's like just this level of broken, right? And in the moment, there's absolutely no gratitude, right? Because
No,
where do you find that? Like you don't, all you do is feel it. And especially, in active addiction, you don't know how to feel things
nope.
and you don't know how to process things and you have no coping skills. And so, um, looking back, it's like there were a lot of things I can see now. Let's say this. I can see now how divinely choreographed the entire situation was because I was never going to go to rehab, right? Like you mentioned, it's like in my eyes, I didn't have a problem. I didn't have a drug problem. Drugs were my solution.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I was never going to throw in the white flag. I was never going to wave it and say, oh, I'm going to go to rehab and fix this problem that I have because that wasn't how it was going to work for me. And so for me to get to a point where I could have gratitude in my heart, where I could appreciate life, where I could, experience life to the fullest, those things had to happen, all of them. And
Yeah.
so it's not regret and I'm not sorry that it happened.
Yeah.
Do I love it? No, not particularly,
Yeah.
but I'm grateful that all of it happened the way that it did, or I wouldn't be capable of appreciating life the way that I do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I, you know, same. I don't love all of it. Some of it was a freaking blast. Like, let's not lie. Okay.
Yeah.
But some of
Right.
it was the worst, like the pits of hell. And the only, I guess, one of our promises says we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I guess the only regret I do have is, that I hurt people that I love. I mean, that sucks. And especially my daughter, because that's just something that I can't get back. But our relationship is wonderful and we were able to repair and we're better now than we were even before I started drinking. So like there's a lot that came out of that also. But I still, I know it sucks to know that you hurt your kid or that you worried your parents sick or, that kind of stuff.
Right.
That still kind of sticks with me a little bit. But again, you know, I'm I'm grateful because I never would have learned how to deal with my feelings. I was
Right.
never going to be that person. I wasn't interested in feelings. I don't want to know that. I don't want to learn that. I don't want to feel any of that shit. I want to stay real busy and be
Yep.
productive and go do things, but I don't want to feel things. And I was going to have to be forced into it, which is kind of, I guess, what ended up happening. And now I'm grateful for it. Some days I'm like, wow, these are a lot of feelings. I would rather not. Uh, but at least we can, right? At least we
Yeah.
don't have to burn our lives down over it or run away or whatever. And do I always handle it perfectly? Of course not. I mean, it's kind of a disaster some days because I still
Yep.
don't love feeling stuff. Um, but I feel really lucky that we're even here, much less that we get to learn how to do that. What do you think is the best part of being in recovery for you right now? Because I know it evolves and it changes all the time. And what was true a year ago, maybe it's something different now. But like today, right now, what's the best part of recovery for you?
Um, the best part of recovery is, for me, I think, love, and I mean that in a lot of different ways. I
Yeah,
mean that I have the capacity to
yeah,
love, and that I'm in a relationship with a great man, and I love that I love being in love with him, and I love that I can show up for him, that I'm capable of doing that. Um, but also just relationships in my life, right? Friendships that I've been able to create and forge and nurture. That's something I was never capable of doing. If it wasn't about drugs, I used to believe that if I didn't have something to offer, then people would not want to be around me. And so it was, I either needed to have money, or I needed to have my car, or I needed to have drugs. And if I didn't have those things, then I knew people didn't want to be around me. And And that's not how friendships or relationships of any kind should be.
Right.
And, and now it's like, I tell my people all the time, I tell my yogis, right? I love you guys.
Yeah.
Because that's something that I didn't used to have and I didn't used to feel. I think that that's one thing that kind of gets skipped over, right? We talk about how we don't want to feel things, and we use drugs to. I use drugs to change the way that I felt,
Mm-hmm.
and my intention with that was to block out the bad feelings,
Yeah.
right? I don't have to feel bad, but what that does is also block out the good feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so, getting sober, it's like you don't know how to feel. You don't know how to feel bad feelings, but you don't know how to feel good ones either. Um, Not in a healthy way, not in a responsible way, not in a healing or good way. And
Yeah.
so it's really a lot of learning all of those things. And I think that that's something that doesn't get enough attention, I don't think.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful that that's something that I've learned along the way, and it's most definitely my favorite part.
That's so awesome, and it's so true, because what we think are good feelings when we're using, they're not actually coming from a place of joy, like that pure unadulterated joy that you get from nature or animals, or like you're
Yeah,
seeing your kid happy or whatever, like pure shit that's really good, for real good. It's chemically induced. I mean, yeah, you feel good when you're on coke, but it's because you're forcing your brain to like release all of that dopamine, you're
yeah,
you're forcing, it's a chemical, it's a fake happiness essentially, and it goes away really fast, like 15 minutes later. Now you are like, feel worse than you've ever felt in your whole life, and now you have to get more of the thing to feel happy again, and whatever, and that is the cycle. um, and I remember the first time that I had like a true belly laugh, like in sobriety, because I was convinced I was never going to laugh again, I was never going to have fun again, like this is going to be fucking terrible, I can't even imagine. And then I had that first moment of like just crazy joy, like laughter. And I realized there were no chemicals involved, and nobody was trying to get anything from me. I wasn't trying to get anything from them. It was just like this group of women, sober women eating together. And you know what I mean? And it was my
yeah,
first glimmer of hope. Like, oh yeah, I'm still in there. Like I still am here. I thought I had gone away long before. I felt like my soul had just sort of left the building.
yeah,
Um, so I love that reminder of, yeah, of course we were trying to escape discomfort, but we also, unfortunately, you numb out all the good stuff too. And I didn't even
hmm
realize that, because I thought I was having the good stuff because I was
yeah,
getting fucking high. That is the good stuff, right? Like,
yeah,
and I remember in treatment, I did go to treatment a couple of times, and it did not work for me at all. Because I wasn't convinced I had a problem. I was going because other people wanted me to go. But I remember they asked me what my drug of choice was, and I remember saying more, because that's what it is. It's just, I just want more. I want better, different,
yeah,
more like, um, it doesn't just have to be drugs and alcohol. And it took me several years into recovery to realize I was using other things now, working too much or shopping or exercising or just whatever the more was. And each year that we're sober, I think we get to go a little deeper into the layers of like what drives that stuff. But we have to stop. I had to stop the drinking and using to be able to be present and available to start doing the work. Um,
hmm
and people beat themselves up for all this other behavior that comes up. But it's like, don't do that, right? We're
yeah,
working toward stuff. So that took me a long time, because it's perfectionism is a huge part of, I think, addictive personalities. If you
yeah,
can't do it perfectly out of the gate, you just don't even want to mess with it. And that's right.
yeah.
That's why a lot of us have a hard time staying sober sometimes. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, though, what's the hardest part of recovery for you? If there is.
Um, I think that the hardest part of recovery for me is that not everyone is
Mm,
recovered.
yeah.
You know, especially for me because I spent so much of my life. It was like all of my childhood people, all of my adult people, right? All of my people were people that used,
Yeah.
and you know, uh, Friday, this last Friday, I had a really close friend of mine that had been sober for years that passed away, and he OD'd. And
God.
and I mean, I grew up with them. Him and his sister and I all rode the same bus in elementary school, right? And so um, that's heavy for me, and I wish that everybody just could be, right. And I know that recovery is becoming cooler, right. We're slowly, people are learning that this really is a better way to live.
Yeah.
For me, it's just hard that not everybody gets there.
Yeah. That's a really good one. I don't think anyone's ever answered in that way. And it shows again how compassionate and empathic and selfless you are. And I'll have 11 years next month, and I've seen a lot of people die. I mean, not a lot, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but 5 or 6 people over 11 years who tried so hard. And I struggle with religion. I struggle with certain aspects of some of that religiosity or any type of dogma, really, because I don't know why I got to survive. I will never understand that. I am not more worthy or valuable than anyone else. And so when people say God saved me, or God did this, or God had a plan for my life and that's why I survived all those whatevers, I'm like, okay. I mean, believe what you want to believe. That's fine. But I have people who were wonderful that I knew that had great hearts that really fucking tried to get this thing, and they are dead. And there's no way that if that God exists, there's no way that God wouldn't have swooped down and saved them too, if that's really how everything worked. And so I have a heart, it just feels very arbitrary. And I do have survivor's guilt sometimes because I did things a lot more reckless and dangerous than some of those people. And they just happened to get caught up with oxy or something or heroin or something that was a little more risky. And so watching people die, especially people who tried, or they did have sobriety and recovery for a long time, and then they didn't, That's hard. And you want to help them and save them. But I remember, first of all, we can't save anybody. It's not really our job. We can help them. But when people were trying to help me and save me, there's nothing you could have said to me. Like I wasn't there, and I wasn't going to get there until I was ready. Yeah. And luckily I stayed alive long enough to find a chair, and some of us won't. Like I don't. Okay. How did yoga become part of your life? Was it always part of your life, or was it part of your healing stuff, or both?
It really wasn't. And what's interesting is really I got into yoga through recovery. I'm the first person that I ever met in the rooms of AA. He actually told me that he had 6 months sober from IV drug use. And when I tell you that that's what kept me coming back, I didn't believe him. I didn't. I was like, there's no way. People that are IV drug users don't recover. Right? And I was like, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. And so he was the reason that I came back, because I wanted to catch him in a lie. If that doesn't tell you like where I was at.
Yeah, I get it.
Like when I say that I could not imagine my life without drugs, that's what I meant. I did not think that it was possible. And he was the reason I kept coming back. And so and it was a Burn at Noon group, right? It's like a bunch of old dudes that golf but they have, decades sober. And so it's like, y'all are doing something. You're doing something that I need to learn how to do. And he was the one person that was around my age, right? And we have this huge thing in common. And fast forward probably about a year, and he was doing his teacher training at Heart and Soul, and he was like, "You got to come check it out. I think you would love it." And really, where I was at the time, I'd just gotten out of jail. I did not know how to take care of myself. I didn't exercise a day in my life. I would run if you were chasing me, but only for so long. And so, so I went, and let me tell you, my first class, it was during teacher training, and so I don't know if you remember, but those rooms get full,
and
so there's probably like yes, and so there's probably like 25 people in this room. and we're almost mat to mat, and I'm dying, girl, I'm dying. And I was like, in my brain, I'm like, we have to be almost done. Like, there's no way this can continue. This is not sustainable. And and no sooner do I finish thinking that, and Brad says, "All right, guys, we're about halfway through." And I'm telling you, in a room full of 25 people, I said out loud, "Holy fuck!"
Like,
And all these people kind of look at me, right?
was that out
And
loud?
so, yeah, yeah. And so I leave, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. It did something for me. It did something for my soul. Not to mention, what it does for your body, because
Yeah.
that's undeniable. But um, it was really the first time that I'd gone somewhere for the sole purpose of exercising, right? And I didn't hate it. I did think that I was going to die,
Yeah.
but I didn't. And so that was how I ended up going, and I just obsessed about it. I wanted to go back. I wanted to feel that again. It was like this holy pure, um, just completely awesome cleansing experience for me, and I wanted more of it. And that was really it. I was sold at that point. I was fresh out of jail, working two jobs. There was times I was working three jobs, and I still made time to go to yoga, because it was just it for me. And so
Yeah.
really it was through getting sober and going to AA, right? And meeting
That's
meeting people that saw something in me that I definitely would not have ever seen in myself.
that's so awesome. Because when you're talking about, I mean, first of all, like when you're in the middle of something and you feel like this has to be almost over, I can't keep, this is torture. Just like, I love it, but I hate it. And when is this going to be over type of feeling? I have felt that way many times, especially in early recovery, and even still
Mm.
sometimes. Like there's these just times or seasons or whatever it is where you're like, is this almost fucking over? I can't do this much longer. Like whether it's the step work or you have a loss or I've been going through perimenopause since 2021. I'm like, is this ever going to fucking end? I'm just gonna, I don't know, jump off my roof if this doesn't.
Yeah.
But that tenacity, that grit, that like being able to be uncomfortable for extended periods of time. And for me, that's what I needed
Mhm.
to learn in recovery. When I'm sad or I'm anxious or I'm fearful, those are all part of the human experience. And it's okay for me to feel that way. In fact, it's important. And also, I don't get to fix it like that. That's not how this works. I'm going to be with those feelings. I'm also going to look for the other stuff, just the gratitude and the joy and like little snippets of happiness I can find in maybe an otherwise challenging day. And to me, yoga feels that way because you've got to hold these really uncomfortable poses and it's really hot and it seems like it's going on for a long time. And for me, I see a lot of parallels, right? Of like,
Mhm.
but you're not doing it to punish yourself. You're doing it to love yourself, to help yourself, and
Mhm.
to condition. And I think too, when you're releasing tension and trauma from your body, it takes a long hold sometimes in those positions. It's not something you're just going to fix. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's so interesting that you say that and that you yelled that out in class because that's fucking funny. And that's the kind of person you are. And I could just tell when I met you because I remember walking in there and no offense, but people out here kind of all look the same. And there's just this like vibe, like all the people that like leave church and go to Luby's or whatever, like on a Sunday,
Yeah.
like people just all kind of look the same. And then
Yeah.
you were like, had tattoos and like dreads and, whatever. And I was like, what is this about? This is amazing. I feel like I'm back in Austin. Um, so, like in your classes, you always ask your students to ask, "What do I need from me today?" Um,
Mhm.
and why is that part of your teachings and intention settings in class? Because you always said that, and it really stuck with me. Because you talked about kindness and you talk about all these things. What's my intention? What do I want to take out of this class going back into the world after it's over? But you always asked us to ask ourselves, what do I need from myself today? And it's not something we really are ever asked to think about for whatever reason. So, like, where does that come from? Why do you do that?
Um, well, I think that is why. I think that we just culturally, right, as Americans, we go, we check boxes, we cross things off lists, um, and we
Yeah.
show up for a lot of people. We wear a lot of hats. We have a lot of expectations of us and for other people. Um, and so I think that my role as a yoga teacher is to push you into uncomfortable spaces,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's where growth happens, right? Like you mentioned the same parallel with recovery. Um, the moment you want to get out of a pose in yoga, that's where the work starts happening, right? For you. Um, and and so pushing you into that mental space where, you know, you have 1 hour, and in that hour, the hardest part is showing up, period, right? And so
Right.
getting yourself there, and then allowing yourself permission to think of yourself, right? And I think that we get so caught up in showing up for other people, in being productive, that it's something that's so easy and so simple, but we forget it all the time, is that showing up for yourself is critical. And so, I didn't even learn how to do that, or even really know that that was a thing that I could do or needed to do, until well into my sobriety. And so the beauty in it is that in showing up for yourself, you're more capable of showing up for other people,
Right.
right? You're filling holes within yourself that you don't really even know that you have. And so I think, I just like to encourage people to fill that spot, to find some love, and show up for themselves. It's not. I think that we're taught that it's a selfish thing to do,
Yeah.
and it's really not. It's necessary, and it can really be a beautiful thing when you do start kind of intuitively just showing up for yourself. And so, yeah, I just like to
But
encourage people to kind of go into those uncomfortable spaces.
yeah, but also, and I love how you say that because it's like, it's also, because I remember people, like back in the day when I was drinking and using, like, well, what kind of hobbies do you have? Or like, what do you do for yourself or whatever? I was just like, cocaine and Dos Equis. Like
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
um, go out on the boat and like, be free and,
Yeah.
get a babysitter and like go get away from like work and responsibilities and all the things. And like, and I truly, I'm not kidding. I thought that was self love. I thought that was self care. But what I realized in recovery, because to me that was blowing off steam. I work hard. I get to check out sometimes. I get to do that. I'm a grown up. I can do whatever I want. I'm taking care of my responsibilities over here. So this is what I want to. And that actually was selfish because I was escaping, but I was also hurting myself. I didn't realize that at the time. I thought I was taking care of myself, letting myself,
Yeah.
celebrate or be free or whatever I called it at the time. Um, but when you said it in class one time, I remember it made me emotional, and I don't know why exactly, but I was like, something is there. It's like I'm always the one saying, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" to everybody else. And when people ask me how I'm doing or if I'm okay or if I need anything, I just like poo poo it away. Like, I'm fine. Of course, I don't need anything. I'm good. Like, I'm the
Yeah.
one who comes and helps you. You don't need to help me. I don't need that. Right. I'm very guarded from
Right.
that and we've all been disappointed by people who we were supposed to count on and stuff. And maybe that's a part of it. Maybe it's from childhood. I don't really know. But um, when you said that the first time, I remember crying, and I cry a lot on my mat. So, like, that's, not a huge surprise. But at the same time, I pictured myself in my mind's eye asking myself, how are you? Are you okay? How are
Mhm.
you doing? And I don't ever really do that. I'll go get a massage or I'll go get my lashes done or I'll do stuff that I'm telling myself this is taking care of myself. But, you know, there's something about the way you said it and the way that you are as a person that made me really internalize that. And it's something that I do now. Now, I don't do it to my adult self. This is how fucked up my head is. I have to do it to my like 9-year-old self.
Yeah.
I have to go approach my 9-year-old self and say, how are you doing? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? That's sort of the exchange that it has to be, because I still believe that my adult grown up self shouldn't need anything from anyone. I still have that unhealthy belief, and I'm aware of it and I'm working on it, but it changed my life. I just wanted to tell you that, like, it really helped me for whatever reason. And other people have said that in meetings, therapists have said that kind of stuff before. And I was like, oh God, like whatever. When you said it, I was just like, okay. So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What part, if any, does spirituality, God, whatever, what part does that play in your life and in your recovery?
I think that, there's something in the book that says God's either everything or God is nothing. And that was kind of the first time that it was really made very black and white for me. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's some things that I've had, experiences that I've had that for me have shown me that there is God. Right. And so I've always kind of been a little careful in even calling it that.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't really know why, but I do believe that God is everything, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a little bit in me and there's a little bit in you. And, there was a time I went to a church, and someone had asked me kind of my story, and I told them a little bit, and they said, well, how did you end up in Burnet, Texas? And I said, well, I guess my stars just aligned. Right. And she said, oh, we don't believe that here. And I was like, I don't know who we is. But I believe that my God made the stars.
Right.
And if he created them, then he can certainly communicate to me through them, just like through people and everything else. And so I do think that the 12-step programs have gotten me to kind of delve deeper into what I think and what I believe. But I don't know that it's definable. Right. And I've tried to go to churches and like you said, I'm a different breed than most people out here in the country. And so, normally I go to churches, and the unfortunate part is I found a couple that are awesome places. And I can go and I can find some truth there. But I think more than anything else, I seek truth. I don't seek answers. I don't seek, other people's definitions of what works. And I can go to churches and I can find some truth there, and I can find truth in people. Unfortunately, there's a lot of places locally where it's not that way.
Yeah.
Right. And I think for me that, it does help, praying and having a meditation, right? Morning meditation. But I don't believe that God, like you said, saved me. Right. And I don't think that, I don't know that he saves anyone really. I think there's a lot of emphasis on, a higher power, in AA, NA 12-step programs. And I think that is critical. I think that understanding that there is a thing that we probably can't explain, has been useful in my recovery, and knowing that I have a bigger purpose, and that I can reach people and I can connect with people, and believing that there is something that created all of us, to me has helped to that end. But I think that you and I are probably a lot different than a lot of people, especially around here.
Yeah. And it's so emotional. People get so upset about it because it's their identity sometimes. And I was raised in a small town in Texas, south of Houston, where people's religion was their identity. And like, it was very conditional. You either believe like we believe and you behave like we behave, or you're out, and that's it. And the Jesus I learned about in Sunday school, that's not how he acted. And so I never was able to reconcile those very different interpretations
Yeah.
of these teachings. And so I knew as a child, I was like, isn't the route I want to go. But I knew there was something. And I remember my original sponsor, I was like, look, I have a lot of hangups around religion. I was raised Southern Baptist, don't want to have anything to do with any of that shit. I was like, I love nature. I love music. I love animals. I love community and people doing nice things for each other. There's a lot of things that I feel God in or see God in, whatever God even is. Even if I refer to it as universe or spirit or source or anything
Yeah.
out here, people look at you like you're like a witch,
Oh yeah.
like you can't say that, right? And that to me,
Yeah.
you're missing the point. You're so caught up in the rules that you're forgetting what the message is, which is love
Yeah.
and helping and forgiving and like I don't need a church that'll take me at my cleanest and shiniest. I need it when it'll take me when I'm like just in the middle of it, right? And I didn't
Yes.
find that. What I did find that in though was AA, and other places too, but like yoga and stuff like that. But my original sponsor, I told her, I said, I'm not going to be able to do step 3. I just don't, I can't do it like that, not in a traditional way.
Yeah.
And she said, look, all you need to know is that there is a God and you're not it. Can you agree to that? And I was like, yes. And she's like, okay.
Yeah.
And that's all it was that you're not the one. You're not in
Yep.
charge. All the things that are God-like or deity-like, take that away from yourself because you're the one calling the
Yep.
shots and you want to control people and situations and outcomes. And that's what's driving your addiction, right? And I don't know, she kept it really simple for me. And then over the years, I found secular meetings. I have found places where there are free thinkers and seekers who don't need to know the answer.
Yep.
I just want to stay sober emotionally and physically and be of service to other people and myself. So like, you know, whatever that looks like. But I love hearing people's stories because there are people I love and adore who are totally religious. And in my
Yeah.
mind, they apply it the right way.
Yep.
They're rolling up their sleeves and they're doing the work, instead of sitting back
Yeah.
and judging people. Like to me, that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
Uh, so what kind of tools do you invoke when you need to recenter or like if you get triggered or something comes up that you're like not in a good place? What do you do to recenter, snap out of it, whatever?
Um, Meditation mostly is really it for me. There's times where I'll pop into, a yoga pose, right? Sometimes it's as simple as that, but a lot of it is just quieting the mind. Have you read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle?
I don't think so.
Okay. That's your homework.
I'm writing it down.
Um, yeah, The Power of Now. It's a truly fantastic read, but in it, he describes, it's kind of like if you've never meditated, this is how you start. And he describes it like a game of whack-a-mole, right? So um, you start by counting your breath. And when I first started, my mind would just reel. I would count my inhales and my exhales. And now it's kind of, I just count my exhales. And I kind of have, built up sort of a tolerance to my own bullshit, I guess. And,
Right.
and, and as soon as you just count. And as soon as you realize that you're no longer counting and you're thinking, like that's the mole, right? You whack it and you start back at 1.
Right.
And it was that simple for me. Practicing that is critical. There's moments where I'm like, okay, I'm not showing up the way that I want to show up. I just need to stop for a second. And especially early in recovery, it doesn't really happen so much anymore. I think that I really sort of keep pretty level at this point, but a couple of weeks ago, I did the same thing. I bathroom meditate at work, and it's like you just have to take a second, right? And it's
Yep.
like a minute or two, right? We're not talking about like a 30-minute bathroom break, right? But just
Right.
go to a separate place for a minute and just stop. Sometimes it's a hike in the woods. I love hiking. I love nature. I love trees. Trees are
Mm.
my shit.
Mhm.
And so finding somewhere that you can maintain some sort of peace just for a moment.
Mhm.
For me, that's what what works for me.
Okay. That's great. That's awesome. Um, and in recovery, we talk a lot of times about pause when agitated, and that's what that is, right? Just hold on,
Yeah.
hold on a
Yep.
second, because you can feel it. I can feel it when it's coming
Yep.
on, and I'm either about to react in a way that I'm going to have to make amends for later, or I just feel out of sorts. And anytime I feel it in my chest, or because I get physiological warnings
Yep.
first, right? And
Yep.
that awareness, that sobriety, that willingness to be present with yourself and to stop. And it's hard. It's really hard to do in early recovery, especially that first year was a booger for me. Um,
Yeah.
Still, family stuff there are a few things here and there that can just really set me off. And people do box breathing, or they say the serenity prayer, or they write stuff, or but I love when you call it bathroom meditation, because I've had to go do that where I have to, like the holidays, we're coming up on the holidays. We're at a lot of parties. We're
Yes.
going to do all these things. We're around a lot of people who are drinking, or maybe we're around family that isn't in emotional recovery, and maybe their behaviors are the same and ours are different, or whatever. And that's the other thing too, is that we have to remember we can leave a situation, whether it's to go to the bathroom to take a minute, or to literally get in your car and go somewhere else because you need
Yeah.
to, maintain your sanity. Um, but those are the tools. I think that there were so many forks in the road where I could have relapsed over the last 11 years. And the reason that I didn't was because of what you just said.
Yeah.
First of all, the awareness of, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Because if I keep doing that and I don't stop and address it, at some point, knowing me, I will get a case of the fuckets, and I'll just go find something to make myself feel better.
Yep.
And I don't want to get to that point. So, and I think sometimes I'll call somebody in recovery, and they'll be like, wow, you're talking really crazy right now. And I'm like, I know.
I know. That's why I called.
I needed to get it out. And now that I've said it out loud to someone else, I'm like, holy shit, I need to take a second here.
Yeah.
Because these are old patterns. So, how would you say your relationships have changed since you got into recovery? You talked about it a little bit before with like your romantic relationship and your friendships, but what about family, your relationship with yourself? Just what's different about that now?
Um, Literally everything. Yoga really taught me, especially teacher training. Um, it truly gave me a sense of community and a
Mm-hmm.
sense of being able to be a piece of
Yeah.
something bigger,
Yep.
right? And it really taught me that I can connect. There was um, uh, activity that we did in teacher training where we literally just we stood face to face with another yoga teacher with a yoga block in between our toes, so pretty close.
Yeah.
And we just looked, and it was a line of 6 people facing 6 people, and you literally just stand there and you look into their eyes for a full minute, and then you go down the line, right? And so you're standing in front of 6 people, 1 full minute each, just looking into their eyes. um and it literally brought me to tears, um because I really had a problem with eye contact. I,
Wow.
I would I would be facing someone and I would look just slightly to the left of them. I would not look them in the eyes. And it wasn't because I didn't want to see them. It was because I was afraid of what you'd see in me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't, it was too vulnerable for me. It was too much. And so just this one 6 minute activity, it was like I don't have anything to be scared of anymore. And I have a love in me that I want to share. And, with the people that I'm closest to and with the people that I just meet.
Yeah.
Um, and being sober has enabled me, it's made me realize that I'm capable of connecting with people. And that's something that, when I was in active addiction, community was the last thing I even thought about.
Yeah.
And so even the most basic of relationships. I'm going to tell you a really cool story. Yesterday, we went to HEB at Marble Falls,
Yeah.
and Matt signed me up for sweet potato casserole for Thanksgiving, and I've never made it before. And so we go to HEB. I told Matt, I said, this weekend I want to make a practice sweet potatoes because I am not about to bring a disaster to family Thanksgiving. And so we go to the produce section, and there's this sweet lady. Her name was Priscilla, and she's 80 years old. And I went to go get the saran wrapped package of 4 sweet potatoes, and she
Mm-hmm.
goes, "Oh, no, you don't want that." She goes, "These should be 50 cents a pound right now this time of year." And she goes, "Put that down. That's $4." And I'm not joking when I tell you she stopped what she was doing and she came over and she helped me pick out. She's like, "I'm going to pick out the best sweet potatoes for you before I even pick out mine." And she helped me
Oh,
pick, and she goes, "Well, how are you preparing them?" And she and we just had this awesome, conversation. And it's like, old Krista would have run from that. I would have run so far from that. And I asked her name and I told her my name. And we had this 6.5 minute exchange that was like, it really touched me. And so being capable of that, just interacting with another human and having, a real conversation, we just kept talking about her the whole way home. And it was like, I would never have accepted that.
yeah.
I wouldn't have known how to accept that. And so, I mentioned love and that being such a huge part of it. And it's not just giving love, but it's receiving it as well. And being
Yeah.
capable and knowing how to let that in, and being vulnerable enough to let it in. And so it literally shifts everything. It shifts every single relationship you could ever have.
And you're open to it. And I think that's the difference. You're open to receive that type of love, help, instruction, whatever. Because in addiction, isolation is like goal number one, right? Like that is, and I think Brene Brown or somebody says that, recovery is not the opposite of addiction. It's connection or something like that. And that's what we're always looking for is connection.
Yeah.
And I think we have such a hard time. A lot of us have a hard time connecting because of intimacy issues and vulnerability and shame or how we were raised or just whatever. And I think like those little pure moments like that at the HEB with Priscilla, like that's what life is made up of, right? These
Yeah.
conversations. And I remember I was talking earlier about like never wanting any help, almost feeling offended if somebody tries to help me. Like,
Yeah.
did I ask for your opinion? Like that's the old, just so much armor that like you couldn't help me if you wanted to because it was a way to self-sabotage or to self-protect or whatever it was. I don't even know. And I still feel it sometimes, but at least I'm aware and I can pause. But my mom said to me one time, because I was in one of my woe is me things, blaming everybody for all my bullshit. And I was like, you never showed up for me when I needed you or whatever I was saying. And she's like, you never let anyone help you, and then you get mad at them for not helping you. And then you get mad if they do try to help you. And she's like, nobody knows what to do with you. And I'm like, oh my God. And it took me a long time to realize that's exactly what was going on. And sometimes, even if you don't need help, you probably would have figured out your casserole with or without Priscilla's help. But what you did is give her a gift of getting to help you. And you probably will have a better casserole because of her, because of her input. But like same with my
Hands down,
mom.
I sure will.
Yeah, somebody like my mom or whoever, like if my mom wants to help me with something, it doesn't matter whether I need it or not. Like my ego needs to step aside and allow her to help me because it's something that she needs to do. And I just never thought of it like that.
Yeah.
Like, and those are the revelations, I think, where that is vulnerability to me. Accepting help feels very vulnerable because I'm afraid you're going to think that I owe you something now. Because before my relationships were transactional. And it's hard to go from that to, oh, you're just doing this because you love me. That's it, know? But what a beautiful, I need people to help me at HEB. I'm always like, oh my God, how do you make this? So why does yoga help us release trauma? Like, why does it do that? Right? Like, why do we cry or have weird moments of, eureka? Because I always just thought this will be good for my flexibility and mobility. I had no idea that I was getting into this spiritual, mind, body, cosmic, whatever it is. What is it about yoga that does that?
So, well, our bodies remember, right? And they hang on to things that we put it through, and we put it through a lot. And so, there's certain things, particularly, heart openers, hip openers. And those, I think hip openers are almost kind of shockingly an emotional release. Sometimes it can be really surprising. But as humans, we carry all of that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's like, okay, well, yoga does help with your flexibility. But a lot of our flexibility is limited because of the traumas that we carry around, because of all the junk that we carry in our bodies. And so it can limit how we move and really affect a lot of things. And so when we start opening up to that, it's not just our physical bodies, but our mind body as well. And so, we hold on to things. It's what we do. We're like little emotional hoarders. And so when we start opening up our bodies, we start releasing some of the things that we've packed away and that we've carried for years. And it really can. Crying is not an unusual thing. It happens really often. And the first time that someone cried on their mat in one of my classes, I was like, yes, like I can teach yoga.
Yeah.
And it really can be kind of surprising, even heart openers. There are people that have come up to me after class and said, I really cannot do camel. I can't do fish because it's really a vulnerable thing. We keep that protected even in our posture, right? Yeah. And so when we start opening, it's like it really can feel vulnerable, and it can feel scary. And so you're kind of learning to open things that you've intentionally kept closed. Wow. And it's like the gift that keeps on giving, yoga. It is great for your body. And for some people, that's all they want it to be. Right. And so I think that it has a lot to do with your intention as well. Yeah. I think that there are times where it can happen unintentionally. But I think that when your heart is in the place of, I want to let this go, I don't want to hang on to it, you're more prone to let it go. And it really can be just an incredible release.
Yeah. I think for me, it was just a way to, obviously, flexibility, mind-body connection. I like the spirituality component of yoga as well. I like the history of where it comes from and all of that kind of thing. Not like the Western version, but like the real deal.
Yeah.
But for me, it was my way to recover from my CrossFit workouts. It was a way to recover from lifting really heavy weight. And so mobility, flexibility, like making sure I'm taking care of my body as I'm getting older so I don't hurt myself when I'm working out. And then yoga was way harder than I ever anticipated in so many different ways. I was like, holy shit, like this is hard on a different type of level, which I love. Because no matter how long you do it or how good you are, you can always master something else. There's always, it's a lifetime. And you can do it when you're like 85, right? Like you're going to always be able to do that. But what I didn't expect was to the first time it ever happened, I can't remember. I think we were in child's pose toward the end of the thing. And I just started sobbing. And it was involuntary. I am not a crier. I certainly don't cry in public. Like, I was shook by it because I'm like, something is wrong with me. I must be extra hormonal today. I must be about to start my period. Like I was trying to explain it away. And then I started Googling and I was like, oh my God, I'm releasing stuff.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that was a thing. And so I did reset my intention that it is, like if I need to release things, like come on out, and I shouldn't feel bad about crying or whatever, but I wasn't expecting it. That's, I think, what was so shocking about it. And I don't know if it's more prevalent for women with the hip opener stuff. But there's something I don't know. It seems like it is women, but maybe it's guys too, but that we just store a lot of trauma in our hips.
It really is both. And I think that I think women are, I think experience more release because they're willing to, right? And men experience it too. I've had men, they've cried on their mats as well. But I think even for mobility, right? Like as females, we kind of experience a wider range of flexibility, and mobility. And a lot of men, I think, are shocked when they get on their mats and they're like, well, I thought that I was really flexible, and then I went to yoga and I realized, oh my God, like there's all these things that are, almost out of range completely. And
Right.
and I think that, that's one thing that men, struggle with in even wanting to go to yoga, is they think they're going to look stupid, right?
Yeah.
Or they're not going to be able to do something, just like you said, perfection earlier, right? Where it's like, I want to go in and I want to be a master right off the bat.
Right.
And that's kind of the beauty for me of yoga is that, it's really my favorite part, that it doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter how late you started practicing or how early you started practicing or how long it's been since you've practiced last. It's going to show up and meet you right where you're at. Doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for men,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because
It's humbling.
it's like a testosterone thing, yeah. Um, but I think that it's equal for both. I think that women just experience are just more emotional by nature, I think, and
Right.
so, I think we do experience it a little bit bigger, and I think that we're more willing to experience a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
But it's definitely available there for both men and women.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting because I am very flexible, but when I try to do frog, it's like I don't care what kind of day or how much I've been working on it. Like that pose, not only is it hard for me to get where I want to be, but the pain is, and I'm always like, is this like truly a flexibility issue, or is it because there's resistance there? I feel myself resisting the stretch. I can
Yeah,
feel it, and even though mentally I'm trying to get my body to release it, it won't. And so it's one that I
yeah,
work on quite a bit at home because it's like, what is that? That shit hurts. Like,
yeah,
especially when you come out of it. But I love that because it's like, it's humbling. It's good
yeah,
to have to just be where you are and be okay with it.
yeah.
So, um, okay, well, let's end on this. So I always ask this at the end of these interviews, which is if you had one piece of advice to give to somebody who's either new in recovery or maybe not even sober, they're just thinking about tinkering with this idea of having a sober life. What's a piece of advice that you would give to somebody?
Um, I mean, I think it varies depending on where they're at. I think if it's someone that wants to get sober,
Yeah,
um, start start somewhere,
yeah,
because that's really the scariest part is fear of the unknown, right? So go to a meeting, find somebody that has what you want, right? And I have to say that I'm not someone who I don't regularly go to meetings anymore, but when I was first in recovery, I did. And I learned a lot of things that I still use today. I still do nightly inventories. I still do morning meditations.
yeah,
I learned a lot of different how to make amends, how to, humble yourself and check your ego. There are things that I really did acquire and needed, to go to meetings every day for. It's not for me to go every day now, but,
right,
there are critical tools, and I think that just start
yeah,
is is it. It is going to be scary, and there's times you just have to do it scared.
yeah, yes. That's great advice because that is the hardest part is getting started and that vulnerability. And I think my advice is always similar to that. Just do something, right? Just move in a direction. And if that doesn't work, try something different because traditional AA isn't for everybody. There's a million ways that people do this thing now and find whatever you do, find your people, find a community. We all need some fellowship or community, whether that's your yogis or a church or a 12-step group or a drum circle or like whatever fucking makes you happy. People who rescue animals, people who like find people who, and it's nice. 12-step stuff is nice because you do have this community of sober people. So it's fun to go do social things with people where alcohol isn't the center of the thing all the time. But not everyone in a 12-step community is healthy. Just because you're sober doesn't mean you're emotionally healthy. So we still need to find people that we mesh with. And a lot of people trying to get sober go to traditional meetings and they get turned off by religiosity or, maybe, I don't know. I've just heard all kinds of stories, trans people like not being welcomed in certain meetings and shit like that. Like that, those are not your people. Like you got to keep trying to find the people that make you feel comfortable with who you are. And have support because we all need support. And I think that's one of the scariest things because in addiction, we are so alone. Our world has gotten very small and we're alone. And all of a sudden we're going to try to start trusting people again and asking for help and doing all these things that I would rather chew glass than do any of that stuff, but it saved my life. Or like, well, I can't thank you enough for like taking the time and sharing your wisdom and your love. And you're just like a ray of sunshine. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course.